The end year features kick off with this episode of SEIYUU Lounge. In this episode, you and I are going to cover the solo artist and 2D group debuts of 2024 and explore a little bit why there was barely any activity this year when it came to, well, let's say, basically everything. So, are you curious about this episode? Well, it's time to dive into another one here at SEIYUU Lounge. Welcome to SEIYUU Lounge. I am your host Vanessa, and today's topic is the big solo artist and 2D group debuts of 2024. This is the first out of several episodes to be released in the next couple of weeks about the big happenings in 2024. This time around, you and I are going to cover the solo artist and 2D group debuts, because this year there were no SEIYUU unit debuts. Do know that when I mention 2D group debuts, this is exactly what it is. I will be talking about new groups added to 2D franchises that did not debut this year. This is going to be quite the short episode because this year barely anything happened when it comes to solo debuts or new group debuts within 2D music projects, but still, let's dive into that. Well, when it comes to the solo debuts, we need to talk about the only solo debut of the year by a male SEIYUU artist, which is basically Shoya Chiba. I was expecting a more eventful year, honestly, but Shoya Chiba actually made sure that we started the year with the bang and basically didn't need anyone else to make a solo debut. I'm kidding, really, I'm jesting here, but it seems that he struck gold with his first EP, Blessing. This was a long-awaited solo debut. You will know that I was talking about this for years, saying that I wanted Shoya Chiba to actually make a solo debut because he has a lot of talent and deserves it because of the work that he was doing with SparkLu, as well as with Erosion, with Oz in the Visual Prison franchise, even in the Beat Project franchise as part of Killer King, so he was doing an amazing job in a lot of 2D music projects. And I was forgetting as well SEIYUU. So yeah, he had been doing a lot of amazing work with 2D music projects. Also, Tokyo Color Sonic. But yeah, if I continue, the list doesn't end because he is everywhere. And for years he was everywhere and still is. You can tell that I'm not following a script by the way that I'm talking right now, so... So yeah, Shoya Chiba made his solo debut in January 2024 with his first EP, Blessing. This was quite the interesting solo debut because he joined King Amusement Creative, a subsidiary music label part of King Records, usually best known for housing SEIYUU that will be singing music for anime series or SEIYUU that are still not as veterans, so they will not go right away to the main labels. They start with this one. This is a weird way that they arrange things at King Records because Mamoru Miyano is there, but for example Shotawe was at King Amusement Creative for years, so only now he is part of King Records as part of really the main label. His solo debut was long awaited. If you noticed, he left SparkLu later in 2021 and he only made his solo debut in 2024. And he announced the solo debut later in 2023. This is a good thing because he made sure that he left a buffer between leaving SparkLu and starting his own thing. Probably because he was trying to check the market and see who wanted to sign him and where he could land with more money or more creative freedom. In another way, it is a respectful thing to do to fans of SparkLu, because if he was leaving SparkLu right away to start his solo career, people would say that he would be trying to cash in on the popularity that SparkLu got with Daybreak at that time, but he actually put a big buffer between his departure from or graduation from SparkLu and his solo debut. So it was respectful for fans of SparkLu. I believe that many fans actually didn't get any bad blood about Shoya Chiba leaving because he did so really respectfully for the members, which is amazing. And then he made his solo debut announcement in 2023, and people, of course, were quite ecstatic. I was crazy about this. This was the news that I was expecting for a long time, and he actually delivered that when we got to January 2024. This was the very first CD that I bought, so quite excited about getting that right at the start of the year. And this is an amazing CD filled with really good songs. I've said a couple of times before that there are some debut EPs or debut CDs that are really unbelievably good. Kentito a couple of years ago managed to pull that off. Shugo Nakamura also managed to pull that off quite easily with his debut CD, but there are very few debut CDs that are really, really good. Very few SEIYUU come forward and say, well, my very first CD is going to be an EP. This is a big, big undertaking. First, because you are still treading the waters and seeing what works and what doesn't. At the same time, you are trying to gauge if the fans are actually really excited about that solo debut or just about you. And then you are also thinking that the music label doesn't want to spend that much money on a solo debut, especially because it can tank, and most solo debuts usually tank by male SEIYUU. So it was a massive gamble in here to make a solo debut with an EP. Usually people make solo debuts with singles just to play it safe. It is 3 songs only. You can get 1 song in each music genre that you like. You can be as experimental as you want. But with an EP, you need to have a more cohesive sound. And you need to be really, really confident about what you are delivering to create something so taxing on the singer that will take a lot of time for the production and that will need a completely different type of marketing behind. An EP needs to sell, it's expensive to produce, much more expensive than producing a single. So this was a bit of a different way to approach a solo debut. I found it quite interesting that Shoei Chiba actually came forward and I'm going to release an EP, and I felt, yes, he's going to perform rock music. It can only be rock music. But actually, when I listened to the CD, although there is rock music, and we start and we end with rock music, so there's no problem, and we have 2 songs with lyrics by Shoei Chiba, we have a dance tune midway through, Kanjoron. No complaints here. I love Kanjoron, it's my favorite song in Blessing. However, I was expecting that since it is an EP and the whole vibe is Shoei Chiba as a rocker, I was not expecting a dance track to appear midway through. That's my biggest grip with the CD, but once again, I have no complaints whatsoever because I love this EP, and early in the year I was saying this is album of the year. Little did I know that Shunichi Toki and Soma Saito would release even better CDs, and actually Shunichi Toki didn't even wait 1 or 2 weeks and he was already releasing one of the best albums of the year. So it is a year that was really packed when it comes to the quality of the albums, but when it comes to solo debuts, of course Shoei Chiba didn't have any competition whatsoever. He was doing his own thing because he was the only one making a solo debut this year. This was a really quiet year for male SEIYUU artists trying to make a solo debut, or basically trying, I would say, The big reason why they didn't make many solo debuts this year like in previous years is that they have seen what happened to a couple of solo debuts a couple of years ago. There were some SEIYUU with really small fan bases and with little work in anime, for example, or little work into the music projects that made solo debuts, and those debuts tanked. Unfortunately, they tanked. Even if some of these SEIYUU in question were really good singers, the solo debuts tanked. So now people were thinking, well, maybe I should not make a solo debut just to make a solo debut and have that in my portfolio or my record, because those will fail. So people are now thinking, I believe they are thinking a bit better about making a solo debut when it makes sense instead of making a solo debut just because everyone is making. And I feel that in previous years we had some solo debuts that didn't make any sense whatsoever and still don't make any sense whatsoever. And they tanked, which only puts more emphasis in the point that I was actually making. So now we are seeing a sort of a niching down in there, or a more, I would say, we are perfecting who can be or who can become a solo artist. People are already noticing that even if you are an amazing singer as a voice actor, that is not a guarantee that you will have a really good solo career. There are a multitude of factors that can come into play. The looks, the personality, their interactions on social media, if the media even likes them. There are a couple of things that really play into that. Not only the music genre and the way they are singing, their quality on the vocal end, although most fans don't even care about the quality on the vocal end. They only want a dance tune and they are ready to go. But yeah, there are multiple factors that play into these. So yeah, this was the big solo debut of the year, the only one, in a really, really quiet year. Now, when it comes to group debuts, we also didn't have much action. What the hell, 2024, you were really quiet. When it comes to 2D music projects welcoming new units, we have Versus Ambivalence welcoming 2 new groups early this year. So yeah, Versus Ambivalence welcomed 2 new groups, and this was announced in May 2024 during a live stream. Basically, they announced that the 7 members that didn't make it to Kranv actually were going to debut. People were thinking maybe they are going to debut as another group. No, they split them in 2, and we got 2 new groups. We got Funfair, featuring vocals by Tayo, voiced by Hayu Tsuchida, Mio, voiced by Kengo Kawanishi, Futaba, voiced by Ayumu Murase, and Kazu, voiced by Tasuku Hatanaka. Their sound is really focused on pop rock music, and it is bubbly at the same time, which is an interesting mix. At the same time, we have Ilu Vista, featuring vocals by Rei, voiced by Makoto Furukawa, Shion, voiced by Chiaki Kobayashi, and Cook, voiced by Shintaro Asanuma. Their sound is more quieter, more R&B focused, and it is really sweet, which is completely different from what I was expecting. I was expecting a regal sound, but their sound is not regal. At least the looks didn't match necessarily the sound, but the sound was equally good. Both groups debuted, and they will be releasing a new album as well, each in the same day in 2025. So they are going to release music always at the same time, which I find quite interesting because they were part of the Versus Ambivalence franchise, the first season, and they didn't make it to the main group, but they were still training together and practicing together, so it makes sense for the 2 groups to be brother groups and actually releasing music at the same time. So I find this quite endearing. At the same time, in November 2024, it was announced that the Versus Ambivalence franchise is going to have a second season, which is basically a reason to bring more idols to the franchise. The lineup is quite exciting at the moment, and these SEIYUU are basically voicing once again 2 characters at the same time. Both characters share the same color, and by the end, the SEIYUU will only be voicing in the main group one of those characters that they are now voicing. This is potentially one group that is going to debut, I would say, in 1 or 2 years' time, because if they go through the rounds of the audition like they did with Kranv, it will take almost 2 years to get the main group coming from the second season of the Versus Ambivalence audition. And these will be a 5-member group. The ones remaining, I believe they will later on debut as another group. I feel that this franchise will always do this, so that people don't get too sad because their favorites didn't make it to the main group, so they will get a second chance. That's what I think, at least. We have amazing vocals on this side. The 2 main vocals that for me stood out instantly are Shunsuke Takeuchi and Daiki Yamashita. They come from Lolodi, and I say they come from Lolodi because Lolodi basically stopped releasing music this year, so finding both of them in this project is quite exciting. It is also a premise to say that this 5-member group, when it debuts, will have an amazing vocal lineup coming just from these 2 alone. And we are talking about high notes and beatboxing, because Shunsuke Takeuchi is doing yet again beatboxing that he's doing with Vedlip, is doing also here. So this is quite exciting what we are getting with the Versus Ambivalence franchise. Like I told you before, I was quite excited that the Versus Ambivalence franchise had this audition format, and that we got Kranv as a result. But I was saying, well, I like when projects only have one group and they stick to it, but it's not always that thing, and it's not always easy in that regard. So we actually have 3 groups as of now. We have the second season of the Versus Ambivalence audition, and from here maybe we get 2 groups. For sure we are going to get one final group, which is going to be featuring the members that are the most voted, and it will be a 5-piece group. And a couple of years later we are going to maybe, and this is a big maybe, a group with the remaining members that don't make it to the final group that will come from this second season. So there are a couple of exciting things coming from the Versus Ambivalence franchise. This is one of the most exciting franchises at the moment, at least for me. So I can't wait to see what they pull off next, and if they are going to collaborate between groups later on. But I believe that having this audition format actually is a really genius idea, because the Versus Ambivalence franchise will become an audition style of project, which is already is, but yeah. And people will be expecting from every 2 years the franchise basically creates a new audition for new members to join in and new members to fight for the place to become part of a main group in the franchise. I find this quite interesting because it doesn't diverge too much from what the K-pop audition programs do. And this brings longevity to the project because you can pump out a lot of groups throughout the years and things don't get boring. In this case, everything that happens in this franchise makes sense. You don't have a group appearing out of nowhere to join a franchise. They are appearing because they are participating in the audition program. So this makes a whole lot of sense instead of here's a rival group or this group always existed and they are veterans, now they appear. Now, here you have things that make sense from a storytelling point and make sense because in reality, this would be what would happen in a K-pop audition program, for example. So this is reality brought to a 2D music project, which works really well because in this way people can vote. They don't have to pay to vote, mind you. Like in other projects, they can vote, they can participate in this project and have a final say about who makes it to the final lineup. And then, if they don't get their favorites to make the final lineup, there is a possibility for them to debut in another group, which is amazing. So this is a really, really interesting project, and I believe that the reality that they bring to this project is something that is welcomed. I'm a bit sick of that fantasy of a 2D project starts with one group, they are the bubbly group, and then a rival group appears, and then a rival group that is really top star appears, and then there's a veteran group in their music label or in a rival music label that helps them, and they appear out of nowhere. So I'm a bit sick of that structure, and it is good to see something a bit more realistic, which would be, in this case, there is an idol project or program, audition in this case, in which idols join in, they try to become part of the main group, and they are being voted by fans, they make it to the final group, and they debut. The other ones continue training and maybe get a second chance. This makes sense. This is reality brought to 2D music, and this is something that makes Versus Ambivalence for me a project that is quite exciting because there's no ridiculous rivalries basically happening or bad groups or bad boy groups that appear out of nowhere to ruin things. This is a much more realistic thing than the fantasy that there is behind 2D music projects usually. Not to complain because I love a couple of projects that have this kind of setup, that they have a bubbly group and a rival group that is bloody amazing and it is basically at the top step of everything, and then there is a rival group that appears out of nowhere to ruin everything, and maybe there is a veteran group that appears to help everyone else. I love some projects that have 2 or 3 or even more groups in their lineups and they have the whole story around that, but the groups basically appear out of nowhere most of the times. In this case, everything in this project makes sense. And this making sense for me is a massive plus. So I can't wait to see what we get with the second season of the Versus Ambivalence audition. And I'm quite excited to see what Funfair and SEIYUU Vista, who released basically music this year, and especially SEIYUU Vista that impressed me a whole lot, I'm quite curious to see what they do next. And of course, Cranv, because Cranv is quite possibly right now one of my favorite 2D groups out there. So yeah. So this was all about the big solo debuts and big group debuts in 2D music projects because this year was really quiet. Well, I'm gonna confess this, 2024 was not a really exciting year. We didn't get even a SEIYUU unit debut. So this was a really weird year. We're really quiet and quite uneventful. And in some way it made me not excited about the music that was being released as a whole. There were years in which I was insanely excited because every month there was something exciting happening. This is almost like a palate cleanser type of year, so you got a bit of a breather in here. So I'm hoping that 2025 is a bit more eventful, hopefully so. And at least, if it is not as eventful, at least with even more quality than this year. Not to complain about the quality of what we got in here. Like I said, SEIYUU made an amazing solo debut, SEIYUU Vista and Funfair made really strong group debuts, so I'm not complaining, but I was expecting more, honestly. Please let me know in the comments if I actually forgot to mention any new group part of a 2D music project that is already out there working for a long time. But I believe that these were only the biggest things happening, and these are very, very few. So yeah, enough about me. Let's ask right now a question to you. So what did you think about the new groups in the Versus Ambivalence franchise? And did you enjoy Shuichiba's solo debut? And what excited you the most in 2024? Let me know in the comments on YouTube. And remember, leave your comments as complex or as simple as they may be, and you can be featured on upcoming episodes of SEIYUU Lounge. If you enjoyed this episode and don't want to miss the THTFHQ's weekly male SEIYUU and music-related content, hit the subscribe button. And if you are listening to this episode on a podcast listening platform, please consider following the podcast and leaving a review. Leaving a review is really simple and helps other people find this podcast and fall in love with male SEIYUU artists and 2D groups. In the next episode, let's talk about the new 2D music projects that took the spotlight in 2024, as well as the 2D music projects that started to fade away. I'll return next week with that episode of SEIYUU Lounge. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you guys around.